Lydia Brown, a friend, a colleague, and a very quick rising and upcoming advocate, both in terms of autism and disability rights. Lydia, thanks for agreeing to be part of this series. Could you just talk about a bit about who you are and what you're doing now?
Sure. My work has been fairly wide-ranging over the past several years. I would say that my primary focus as a disability advocate has been on issues of violence against disabled people. In particular, there's four main areas that I work on, which are abuse and hate crimes against people with disabilities, abuse in institutional or therapeutic settings, police brutality, and prisoner abuse. My work generally focuses on people with disabilities who also belong to other marginal communities, such as the LGBTQ community or racial minorities who have disabilities.
And just for those who don't know, you're also autistic.
Yes, I'm autistic. I'm personally autistic, I am multiply disabled, I am queer, I'm a person of color, and that's why my advocacy is very much focused on drawing out those intersections.
Now let's start with the whole issue of abuse within therapeutic context. I know you've written an article through the Rapporteur on Torture in which it was agreed that a lot of the compliance-based behavioral therapies were a form of torture. Could you say more about what you wrote about in that article?
Sure. So essentially the article is about what you just called compliance-based behavioral modifications or compliance-based behavioral interventions, right? And the reason I've chosen to use that term is because it applies to a very broad set of treatments, therapies, or interventions that are usually used for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, sometimes for people with psychiatric disabilities as well, that are essentially focused on creating behavioral compliance, right? And what I mean by that is not just the surface level, okay, compliance as in, if I tell you to sit down and be quiet, will you sit down and be quiet? Or will I tell you to stay still, to keep your hands to yourself? But also in a more broader theoretical way, I mean compliance as in compliance with arbitrarily defined standards for what constitutes normal. Not just sit down right now, that's part of it, but also when you exist in space, are you deemed closer to normal or closer to abnormal just by existing in that space? Compliance-based behavioral interventions are predicated on this assumption that the goal, right, the ultimate goal for any therapy for someone with a disability is to make that person seem as close to non-disabled as possible. So for example, if you have somebody who has cerebral palsy and can sometimes walk, but more often than not uses a scooter or a wheelchair to get around because it's easier, it's faster, it's more convenient, it's much less physically exacting on the body, but can walk sometimes, everyone for that person's entire life will constantly be telling that person, walk more, you need to walk more, don't use the wheelchair, because if you do, you're giving in. You're letting the disability win. And the reason for that is not based on an actual health reason, it's not based on an actual wellness reason, it's just based on this idea that everybody's bodies and how those bodies function should constantly be molded into these arbitrarily defined standards of normality. Right? And so compliance-based behavioral interventions focus not on function, right? Not on coping mechanisms, not on alternative ways of doing a task that make more sense for someone's body or brain, but rather on compliance with arbitrary norms.
When you take this framework of almost an addiction to this idea of normalcy, how does that play out in compliance-based therapies?
So one of the ways that it affects the autistic community in particular, something that Julia Bascom, who has created the first anthology of writings by autistic people on neurodiversity, describes as quiet hands, right, is this idea that before you can begin learning, before you can be welcome in a space, you have to learn to sit right. You have to learn not to flap your hands. Not because flapping is hurting somebody, you or anybody else, not because flapping somehow puts you in danger, because obviously flapping is the same thing as jumping in front of a car, right? But because it looks weird, because only autistic people do it, because it's considered a marker of not being normal. So instead of, say, focusing on how can I help my autistic client learn to focus on math problems better, or how can I help my autistic client learn when to not hurt other people, which is never, right? Or how can I help my autistic client learn to express their communication needs better? It's, I don't want this person flapping, because that's a symptom of autism.
And the same thing could be said around eye contact, I can imagine.
Right. And I mean, eye contact, like anything else, is entirely cultural. It's governed by cultural norms. In the United States, in Canada, in the UK, right, in the Western world, right now, eye contact is considered a measure of respect. I'm making eye contact with you right now because in our cultural norms, that means that I'm paying attention to you, that means that I respect you, and it means that I acknowledge you as my peer. It means that I'm attempting to connect with you, right? But for many autistic people, it's the exact opposite. For many of us, making eye contact is a painful experience. It takes up an incredible amount of energy and time, and it serves no actual function. So when people say, if you don't make eye contact, you're not connected with other people. If you don't make eye contact, you're being rude and disrespectful. What they're doing is they're saying, here is a culturally defined standard of what constitutes not just normal behavior, but ideal behavior that I'm going to use as a moral yardstick to judge your character. And we know that in other cultural contexts, that's not the case. In different cultural contexts, and for a variety of reasons, right? It's not just black and white. Eye contact doesn't carry the same connotations it does in our culture. It just doesn't. But because it's deemed normal and ideal, if you don't do it, the fact that you're not making eye contact will be used as evidence of your pathology, evidence that there is something wrong with you that needs to be fixed.
Now, you went further than that. You talked about how compliance-based behavioral therapies were not only acquiescing to normal standards, but were in fact torture. Correct. And maybe I would expect a lot of viewers would say, all right, I get how behavioral therapies are connected to normalcy. I don't see how they're a version of torture.
Here's why. Everybody's body and brain has a natural way of functioning, right? Some people's brains process emotions or thoughts in particular ways, and other people's brains do it in others. Some people's bodies are naturally lopsided. Some people walk sometimes and not other times. Some people function best if they're walking on their own two legs. And some people, that literally means they wouldn't be able to go anywhere without certain kinds of assistive technology that match how their body functions, right? And so the reason why behavioral therapies that are compliance-based, right, can be torture is because you're being told that how your body naturally moves is wrong. You're being told that how you naturally communicate is wrong. You're being told that if you do things in the way that makes the most sense to you, that is easiest for you, that is safest and most comfortable for you, even though it hurts absolutely nobody and in fact enhances your quality of life, you're being told that there's something wrong with that you need to be fixed, and it will be fixed with or without your consent, even at the expense of your own health, of your own well-being. Because you're being told, if I don't learn to police my own body the way other people are policing it, then people will hurt me. And if I don't do it, they're going to hurt me. And if I do it, but I don't do it well enough, they're going to hurt me anyway. And that creates an intense psychological situation, right, where someone has internalized that they are to blame for their own abuse.
So I guess the commonality between physical therapy and compliance-based therapy is this pervasive narrative within clinicians that the more we can make our clients appear, behave, function, or emulate normalcy, the better their lives will be.
And people will say that all the time. They'll say, well, why wouldn't I want my child to be more independent? Or, well, if my child is flapping during a job interview, my child is not going to get the job, and then my child will be homeless. And then where will my child be? And here's the question that I want to give back to you. But is that a problem with your child? Or is it a problem with the other people who are treating your child that way? And if that's the case, then what we have to fix is not your child, who is not broken, as they are, but rather what we have to fix are public policies that deny eligibility for necessary services, right? Practices that, regardless of whether there's a formal policy in place, result in real harm and neglect for people with disabilities, and the attitudes of the people carrying out those practices.
So, to give a parallel example, it may be that in a job interview, I may pay more attention to not drooling, but that doesn't mean drooling makes me a less valuable person. And I want to get the job, so play by the rules, but I won't internalize those rules to make myself believe that I'm inadequate.
Right, and that's the difference between compliance-based therapy and other kinds of therapy, because in a compliance-based intervention, you'll be told that drooling means that you're still engaging in this undesirable behavior, and we need to eradicate that behavior. We need to reduce it and eradicate it, just for its own sake. Compliance-based behavioral interventions are about compliance for its own sake, rather than interventions that recognize the complexity of your existence in the world, right? It's not a matter of you drool, that's bad. It's a matter of you drool, and that's okay, but there are other people out there who do think that's bad, and we need to be aware of those people. It's giving people the power and the agency to make choices for themselves. Maybe the kid who's 17 will decide, I'm going to flap in the interview anyway because they don't want me because I'm flapping. I don't want to work for them. Or maybe the kid will decide, you know, getting the money is really important to me right now because I don't have money and I won't survive without it. So I'm going to try very hard not to flap during this job interview to maximize my chances of getting the job. But that's not because I believe or have internalized this idea that flapping makes me a bad person or that flapping means I'm worse or more severe. It's because I'm recognizing that in the real world that I live in, people are ableist. And people will pin all kinds of negative attributes to me if they see me flapping, which is not my fault, it's theirs, but they have real power over me. See, if you want your child or your client to do well, if you want your child or your client to be a happy person, to have a good quality of life, you're not going to accomplish that by traumatizing them. I can tell you that for sure. But how you can accomplish that is by treating them as a peer to you. Rather than saying, I'm doing this for your own good, why not have a candid conversation with your 17-year-old about there's nothing wrong with the fact that you flap your hands. That's okay. But if you do it during this job interview, because that boss doesn't know that that's an okay thing to do, that boss might not hire you. And that's not telling someone there's something wrong with you or you need to stop doing that or you're letting autism win if you flap your hands more. That's being able to acknowledge the reality of the discriminatory world that we live in while also reminding the person that you love all of them, including how their body naturally moves.